All right, so you might be hearing about this new Department of Government Efficiency thing.
DOGE.
Yeah, DOGE. And maybe you're wondering if it's even real
All right.
or like what it even is.
Yeah.
Well, that is what we are diving into in this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Our mission is to unpack the details surrounding DOGE, and we're going to be using a recent YouTube transcript from the Ring of Fire to help us do that.
Sounds good.
And we want to help you understand what is really going on.
Cut through the noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now with this is just the sheer amount of information and misinformation that's out there.
Right.
It's hard to get a clear picture of what's actually happening.
Yeah, and the names that you hear around this are all very attention-grabbing, Donald Trump,
Oh, yeah.
Elon Musk,
Of course.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Sure.
And then the figure who's sort of been in the spotlight, even though very briefly, is Vivek Ramaswamy. So we're going to look at two major developments that have already marked DOGE's early days. The first is Ramaswamy's very sudden departure.
Yeah, that was quick.
And then the second is that it's already facing multiple lawsuits.
Wow. So right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate problems.
Yeah, not even really out of the gate, it seems like.
Right.
More like before the gate even opened.
Yeah, and these aren't issues that are sort of brewing on the horizon. This is stuff that is happening right now.
Yeah. This is breaking news.
Yeah. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So this murky reality of DOGE's existence.
Right.
The source that we're looking at says the Department of Government Efficiency doesn't technically exist yet.
Okay.
But then immediately follows that up with, although it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't.
Well, that clears it up.
Yeah, very clear.
So I guess that's where we have to start, right? Is with that statement.
Right.
What do they mean by it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't?
Right.
I think what they're getting at is that even though there's no official legal framework that establishes DOGE as like an actual department, people like Trump Musk, they're acting like it has authority.
Yeah, like it's a real thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's this weird situation where it's not official, but it's influential.
Right. And that's, I think, where a lot of the concern is coming from.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if it's not official, then by what authority are they operating?
Exactly. And what are the implications of that for, government transparency, accountability, all of that?
Right. And for people who might be impacted by this.
Exactly. If they're making decisions that affect people's lives.
Right.
But they're not doing it through official channels.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yeah. So speaking of problems,
Oh, yeah.
let's talk about Vivek Ramaswamy.
Okay, the guy who was in and out in a flash.
So the timeline here is almost unbelievable.
You're right, lay it on me.
So, according to the source,
Okay.
Ramaswamy was supposed to co-lead DOGE with Elon Musk.
Right, the two billionaire bros.
Yeah, the transcript called them that.
Yeah, I saw that.
So they seemed poised to shake up government efficiency.
Yeah, big plans,
Yeah.
big promises.
And then on Monday, the day that Donald Trump was sworn into office, Ramaswamy bailed.
He just quit.
Just quit. Yeah, the source quotes him as saying, "Yeah, I quit. I'm out. Not going to do it."
Wow. So no warning, no explanation.
It literally took minutes.
Yeah.
The transcript emphasizes that.
That's wild. I mean, that speaks volumes, right?
Yeah.
To just walk away from something like that so abruptly.
Right. And especially when you think about all the fanfare that there was leading up to it.
Right. They were supposed to be this dynamic duo.
Right.
And then poof, he's gone.
So the transcript notes this means that immediately DOGE was down 50% of its intended leadership.
Yeah. I mean, you can't really function like that, can you?
Right. It raises so many questions about how this whole thing was even set up in the first place.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if they had a solid plan or if it was just kind of cobbled together.
Right.
And if they didn't have a plan, what does that say about their ability to actually achieve anything?
Right. And now, of course, there's all this speculation about why he left so abruptly.
Oh, yeah, the rumor mill must be churning.
Right. So one rumor, according to the source, is that he left to run for governor of Ohio.
Okay, interesting.
But the transcript kind of expresses a lot of doubt about that.
Really?
Well, mainly because the election is still 2 years away.
Oh, it's a long time.
And the logic is that having any role at all within this new administration, even if it's informal,
Right.
would likely benefit a potential run for governor.
Yeah, I mean, it would give him some experience, some name recognition.
Right. So it seems kind of counterintuitive that he would just step away entirely.
Yeah, that doesn't really add up.
Okay.
So what other explanations are out there?
Well, the source puts forward a couple of other possible explanations.
Okay, I'm listening.
So one is that he apparently pissed off the Trump base due to racial prejudice that was directed at him.
Oh, wow, that's heavy.
Yeah.
So basically, he was facing some serious backlash.
Right. And the other possible explanation is that he has made some very horrible statements about American workers in the past.
Okay, so maybe those comments came back to haunt him.
Right. And I just want to be very clear here that we are simply reporting what this source is suggesting.
Of course.
We are not validating or endorsing any of these claims ourselves.
Right, we're just presenting the information as it's been reported.
Exactly.
So of those two potential reasons for Ramaswamy's exit, the Trump base issue versus the past statements, which do you think seems more immediately plausible given the political climate?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, given how much scrutiny public figures face these days and how quickly things can spiral on social media,
Right.
I would think that those past statements about American workers might have presented a more immediate and politically damaging hurdle for him.
Yeah, that makes sense. Those kinds of comments can be hard to shake, especially in today's political landscape.
Right, and it might have made it very difficult for him to be effective within this new administration.
Yeah, I can see that.
So whatever the reason for his departure, it leads us to yet another major development.
Okay, what's next?
As if Ramaswamy quitting wasn't enough upheaval, around the same time, DOGE was hit with not just one, but 3 separate lawsuits.
Wow, 3 lawsuits already.
From independent groups, and they all center on the same fundamental issue.
Okay, this is getting serious.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that these lawsuits aren't actually trying to shut down DOGE altogether.
Really? So what are they challenging then?
They're challenging how it's being established and run.
Okay, so it's more about the process than the actual existence of DOGE.
Right. The analogy that's used in the transcript is basically, hey, if he wants to create this thing, he can create it, but he has to create it in a way that is lawful.
So they're saying even if the goal of DOGE is something positive, like increasing government efficiency, they can't just ignore the existing rules and regulations.
Exactly. They have to operate within the legal boundaries.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how the government's supposed to work, right?
Right.
You can't just do whatever you want, even if you have good intentions.
Right. You have to follow the process.
Exactly. So what are these lawsuits specifically alleging then?
Well, the core argument is that DOGE should legally be classified as a Federal Advisory Committee, or a FC,
Okay, I've heard of those.
but that it's not being set up or operated according to the rules that govern those committees.
So they're saying it's not following the proper procedures.
Right, and to understand why this classification matters, we need to talk about the Federal Advisory Committee Act.
FANCA.
Yes, FACA.
Okay, so break it down for me. What is FACA and why is it important in this case?
So essentially, FACA mandates that federal advisory committees operate with a certain degree of openness and accountability.
Okay, that sounds important.
Yeah, so this includes having a publicly available charter that clearly defines the committee's purpose and scope.
Okay, so people know what they're about.
Right, and ensuring that its membership is fairly balanced and represents diverse viewpoints.
So it's not just one-sided.
Exactly, and they also have to designate a federal officer who is responsible for calling and overseeing their meetings.
So there's some oversight and structure.
Right now, federal advisory committees typically serve to provide expert advice and recommendations to the government on various issues.
Okay, so they're kind of like think tanks in a way.
Right, and because of this advisory role they have, FACA is there to prevent undue influence from specific interest groups.
Right, so the advice they're giving is actually in the public interest.
Exactly. And so the plaintiffs in these lawsuits are arguing that DOGE meets the criteria of a federal advisory committee.
Based on how it's functioning.
Right, but that it's not adhering to these fundamental transparency rules that are outlined in FACA.
So they're saying that DOGE is trying to operate in the shadows.
Basically, yeah. They're not being transparent about who's involved or what decisions are being made.
And that raises some serious concerns about accountability.
Absolutely. So the lawsuits specifically take issue with DOGE's membership.
Okay, what's wrong with the membership?
Well, they're alleging that it's stacked and lacks the fair balance of perspectives that's required under FACA.
So it's not representative of a broad range of viewpoints.
Right. The claim is that it overwhelmingly represents a small government crusade viewpoint.
Okay, so it's skewed towards a particular ideology.
Right, and that its members are largely drawn from the tech industry or hold Republican political affiliations.
So it's not exactly a diverse group.
Right, and this perceived lack of diverse representation, according to the plaintiffs, compromises DOGE's ability to function objectively and in the broader public interest.
Yeah, that's a valid concern if they're only hearing from people who share the same perspective.
Right, they might not be getting the full picture.
Exactly, and that could lead to biased decision-making.
So the source also points out that if DOGE were truly intended to be a formal department within the executive branch,
Okay.
its leadership appointments would typically require Senate confirmation.
Right, Right, that's the normal process.
But that hasn't happened.
So that further supports the argument that they're not following the established norms.
Right. They're kind of operating outside the system.
And that raises questions about their legitimacy.
Exactly. And the source even suggests that this might just be the beginning of the legal challenges.
Oh, really? What else do they see coming?
Well, there's a prediction that if DOGE starts terminating federally protected employees without following proper due process, that will likely trigger even more lawsuits.
Yeah, that would definitely be a problem.
Right. So it sounds like the legal landscape around DOGE is already pretty turbulent.
Yeah, it's a mess.
And now the transcript also singles out one individual as being primarily in charge of this whole operation.
Who's that?
Elon Musk.
Oh, boy.
The source states very definitively that he is the one running the DOGE office.
How's that going?
Well, the source concludes that it is a complete and total disaster.
I can't say I'm surprised given everything we've just discussed.
Right. It seems like there's a lot of chaos and uncertainty surrounding this whole thing.
Definitely. And with Musk at the helm, it's likely to stay that way.
So let's recap what we've learned about DOGE in this deep dive.
Okay, sounds good.
First, we saw the very sudden and somewhat mysterious exit of a key leader, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Right, he was in and out in a flash.
And second, almost immediately afterwards, DOGE was hit with 3 separate lawsuits.
Yeah, questioning its basic structure and its adherence to transparency regulations.
Exactly. And the central theme that's emerging from these lawsuits is the fundamental importance of respecting and adhering to established federal rules and regulations.
Even when the stated goal is something positive, like creating new initiatives or improving government functions.
Right. The plaintiffs are basically saying you can't just bypass the legal framework,
regardless of the intended outcome.
So all of this raises some important questions for you, the listener, to think about.
Okay, what should we be thinking about?
Well, first, what do these initial stumbles and legal challenges suggest about the future viability of DOGE?
Right, can it even survive this early turmoil?
And second, how might these lawsuits impact its ability to even begin to operate effectively?
Yeah, will it be bogged down in legal battles for years?
And lastly, what does this whole situation tell us about the broader debates surrounding governmental transparency and accountability in general?
Those are some great questions to ponder.
So as you continue to follow the news, think about this. How often do new initiatives in any sector, whether it's government business or even local community projects, encounter these kinds of unexpected setbacks right out of the gate?
Right, it seems to happen all the time.
And what might that tell us about the often messy reality of trying to turn a vision into a functioning reality?
Yeah, it's rarely as simple as it seems.
And it's a reminder that even with the best intentions, things can go wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that we need to be vigilant about holding those in power accountable.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me on the show today. It was a great discussion.
It was great having you, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Until next time.
Yeah, see you next time.